There's a moment a lot of people have after leaving the US. Not right away, not at the airport, but later. You're standing in another country, nothing is wrong, nobody's hostile, and yet something feels off. You're not being mistreated, you're not uncomfortable, but you suddenly feel out of place in a way you can't explain. This video is about that feeling. What most Americans experience abroad isn't culture shock, it's the quiet realization that their internal reference system no longer works. And when that happens, what often surfaces isn't curiosity, it's a kind of invisible superiority they didn't know they were carrying. Most Americans don't walk around thinking they're superior. In fact, many would say the opposite. They criticize the US. They leave because they're disillusioned. They want something different. And yet, when they arrive somewhere else, a subtle tension appears. Not because the country is worse, not because the people are rude, but because things don't orient around them. And that's where the discomfort comes from. Superiority doesn't always show up as arrogance. Sometimes it shows up as surprise. Surprise that things aren't more efficient or that systems aren't optimized. Rules aren't enforced the right way, quote unquote. People don't prioritize time the same way. Outcomes aren't measurable. None of that is wrong, but the shock isn't about difference. What the shock is about the loss of default authority. In the US, you grow up inside a system that quietly teaches you something, that your way of organizing reality is neutral, that your logic is universal, that your expectations are reasonable by default. You don't learn this explicitly, you absorb it. So when you leave, you don't feel superior. You feel confused that others aren't aligning. And that confusion can quickly harden into judgment. And here's where people start responding to that discomfort in very different ways. Not as identities, but as patterns of behavior. You can see it in how Americans adjust or how they don't adjust. Some people double down internally. They don't say anything out loud, they're polite, they adapt on the surface. But inside, there's a running comparison. Back home, this would never work like this. They say things like this to themselves. They tolerate the country instead of entering it. They live abroad physically, but emotionally remain anchored to US standards. Others go the opposite direction. They aggressively reject anything American. They over identify with the new country. They perform humility. They criticize other Americans constantly. But underneath, the same reference system is still running, just inverted. The superiority didn't disappear, it changed costumes. And then there are people who feel something unsettling. Not pride, not rejection, but disorientation. They realize they don't actually know which rules matter, which expectations are cultural, which assumptions are theirs. They feel smaller, not in a bad way, just less centered. This is the most uncomfortable stage, and most people try to escape it quickly. Here's the part most people miss: the discomfort isn't about superiority being bad, it's about superiority being unexamined. When your reference system stops working, you can either defend it, replace it, or observe it. Only one of those creates actual freedom. This is why moving abroad feels so intense for Americans. It's not the food, it's not the language, it's not the bureaucracy. For Americans, it's the first time their way of seeing the world isn't quietly validated everywhere that they go. That's destabilizing. And most people were never taught how to sit with that. Some people rebuild themselves around this moment, others retreat, others perform adaptation, others return home confused about why it didn't feel like freedom. There isn't a correct response, but there is a difference between leaving a country and leaving the lens or perspective it gave you. Most people only do one. If you felt this tension abroad, it doesn't mean you're arrogant. It means something inside you lost its automatic authority. What you do with that loss, whether you defend it, reject it, or study it, quietly determines what kind of life you build next. Not just abroad, anywhere.